Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We so appreciate everyone who's here. This is our biggest conference ever, the first time we're working with this concept, which I think is just fantastic. I don't know if they're in the room, but the first people I need to thank are Rich Brandwine and Ronnie Schreiber. I can see your halo over there. This concept was actually his idea, and a few years ago I worked with a company called the Bioanalytics Group in the very early days of laboratory notebooks. And to see where we've gone in just less than 10 years, we are in the middle of a major revolution. So I'm very excited about a day that's all about helping scientists and IT people talk to each other and see what kind of new friendships we can make. Excuse me. I also want to thank Rich and Ronnie because they are the founders of Planet Connect. And many of you have been familiar with them. Planet Connect runs internal proprietary conferences for pharmaceutical and biotech companies. Excuse me. And as such, those are quiet. Those are confidential. And so when we have an opportunity to thank them, we really like to do that because it was really their concept to develop the Biopharma Research Council, which is open to everyone. And in brief, we are an association for researchers in industry, academia, nonprofit, government, and supplier laboratories. And one of the things that I appreciate so much about that concept is that we really honor the contributions of all of those parties and the need for everyone to be able to talk to each other across different silos. So thank you very much. I'm just going to say a credit to our committee, our volunteers, our speakers and moderators, and of course our exhibitors and sponsors. Microsoft has a really special offer. I told them I would share with you from here that they have, for the first 200 people that come to their booth, you can get a free Azure Pass for their cloud computing platform. It's worth $200, so you really want to do that. And finally, we are going to be giving a few awards, which will happen tomorrow at the end of lunch. If you win an award, we'll be coming to your booth with a cameraman and present it to you and chat with you a bit. You'll be interviewed, all the exhibitors will be interviewed by committee members to make those nominations. I think I can do this. I'm going to introduce our first speaker and so appreciate Bob Boland and the work he's done and his generous contribution to our conference today. He'll be speaking on fostering external alliances and to drive IT innovation in pharma. He was recruited by Johnson & Johnson to join Janssen Pharmaceutical Research and Development's External Innovation and Emerging Digital Technology R&D IT group. In this role, he holds Group Senior Managerial Direction and oversight responsibilities for developing the U.S. external innovation portfolio, along with the key imperatives and goals of improving internal IT and IT informatics capabilities while accessing innovative solutions in white spaces. Bob.
Thank you. Okay. Bob, ready to go? Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Joanne. And I'd like to say hi to Ronnie, who I haven't seen in a while, but good morning, and good morning, everyone who actually fought through the traffic and the accident and the misty rain to be here. Let's try to maybe shut this off. I think I'll be okay with this. And also to Rich and to Tom Fair. Is he here? Tom? I don't see Tom. Okay. Hey, Tom, another Halo guy. So good morning, everyone. The talk today is around building alliances and what that means as an industry and how we can use the alliances and our ability to foster these alliances to drive pre-competitive innovation in IT and pharma. But before I begin, I wanted to kind of just share two quick stories. And the stories are interesting because one is about choices and the choices that we make as people and choices that we make as an individual, as a person, and also choices that we make as industry members in the pharma industry. The second one is around what we would think around as building alliances, partnerships, and also using the partnerships for the greater good of a group, building a part of a team, being a part of a collaborative. So back in the year 2000, I had the opportunity to move from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And at that time, I was not married, I had no kids, and I played a lot of sports at that point in time. So when I moved into the Cherry Hill home, what I didn't realize was southern New Jersey had a big prevalence of sports athletes that lived in the vicinity of the area. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I had never seen a lot of them, but I knew where their homes were. People say, hey, there's so-and-so's house, and I thought that was kind of neat. But for me, I was actually playing a lot of baseball and a lot of hockey at that point in time. And what I was basically like the Radar O'Reilly or the quartermaster of this hockey team. I had a lot of gear back in Philadelphia that had to move from Philadelphia over into the Cherry Hill house. And I would do this over a course of a few weekends. And what was interesting, as I moved the gear, there was this one little boy who would watch me every time I would unload the gear and put it out into the driveway and try to organize it and then move it into the garage. And he would smile and he would wave, but he wouldn't say anything, and he would move, he would drive on. A couple weeks later, I'm loading another load and had all this gear out there, some stinky helmets and pads and whatnot, and the boy looked at the sticks and he saw me in a beat-up old Flyer shirt. I'm moving things through the driveway into the garage, and he smiled and he drove away. 3 weeks later, I was mowing the lawn, so I thought, grass is getting high, I got to be a good neighbor, I just moved in, I want to go out and cut it. So I'm out there cutting, it's very hot, I'm sweating from head to toe, and up pulls this car. And in the car was a young woman, and the same little boy in the back of the car. And this had piqued my curiosity. They walked up to the sidewalk, and I walked over and I said, can I help you? And I felt really raggy. I didn't really want to kind of see anybody at that point in time. And the woman said, no, can you help us? And I said, sure, what do you need? And she said, would you mind if my son asks you for an autograph? So maybe you can see where this is going. I said, yeah. I just stood there in a stunned silence. I said, well, I think that you might think I'm someone that I'm not. And just before I got the word not out, the little boy looked up at me with these big blue eyes. He was about 10 years old, and he said, but I get all the autographs from all the flyers who live in the neighborhood. And I'm like, looking at me like I'm 5'9", 5'10" max, soaking, wringing wet, 165 pounds. I'm not a hockey player. And I looked at him, and I looked at the woman, and I'm thinking, here is a choice I need to make. Do I choose to kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, pretend I'm somebody I'm not, make the kid's day and sign a name that is not true, or do I tell him the truth? And it was about choices, and I looked at the woman, I looked at the boy, and I said, unfortunately, I think you think I'm somebody I'm not, and I'm not a flyer, even though you saw me with all this hockey gear and all the sticks and the t-shirts and stuff like that. I'm sorry that I can't tell you that I can really sign your book, I'm not a flyer. So he stood there, the little boy, and he looked at me and he said, that's okay, can I have your autograph anyway? And I said, sure, yeah, you can have my autograph, and I felt very proudful at that point. So I took the book, I took the Sharpie, and I'm looking at the woman, I'm smiling, I'm looking at the book, and I said, who should I make it out to? And he says, make it out to Bobby. And I thought, oh, Bobby's my name. I'm like, all right. So I'm looking at the book, I'm saying, Bobby. I look at the boy, I said, Bobby who? He said, Bobby Orr. And for people who are from the U.S., Bobby Orr is a huge hockey player. And I'm looking at this little boy like, okay. So I filled out the Bobby Orr name, and I said from Bobby Boland to Bobby Orr, and he drove away. And I saw the boy every now and then after that. So at that point in time, for people who know me, and there are some friendly faces, some current colleagues and some former colleagues here, they think they know me. I made the right choice, I felt, at that point in time. So also for people who know me, they know that I work down in a location in J&J in a location called Springhouse, Pennsylvania. And Springhouse, Pennsylvania is a scenic setting for the big J&J site, which used to be the Ortho McNeil building. It sits on a beautiful campus. It has a huge footprint in the neighborhood. And for people who have either worked there or visited this site, there's a huge pond outside the building. And it's very picturesque, especially in the fall and in the winter when you can get there and you can see the snow and the trees. But what's interesting about the site is it attracts a lot of geese. And the geese come and go, and they leave their gifts behind for everyone on the sidewalks and on the lawns. But what's most interesting that kind of burns the people who work there, during fire drills, the fire marshals will take the employees from the building and march them across the grass towards the pond to the marshalling areas, and you're stepping on all this geese poop in a way, and it doesn't make people very happy. And when I look at the geese and I think about it, we drive into the campus, they cross the road, they piss off a lot of people because you have to stop and you have to wait to get to a meeting, or you're trying to make a meeting. But maybe a cute thing would be the goslings with the parents walking across the road. So geese to me at the site are a pain, and they're not that impressive in general until they fly and they're in the air. And when they're in the air, they're usually, at that point in the year, they're actually in a formation, they're flying in a formation. So one day I was out with my son near the campus, and he looked up and he said, "Hey, Dad, isn't that kind of cool?" I said, "Yeah, that's, they're flying south for the winter." And he said, "Why are they flying in this formation?" Or he didn't even know the word formation. He just said, "Why are they in this this V shape?" And he was trying to articulate the words correctly to me. And I looked at that and I said, "Well, there's a reason behind that." And I couldn't really tell him at the moment to try to. He's 5, and I'm really trying to get this information out to him. But when I thought about it later, and in the weeks preceding this meeting, I thought, how cool would it be to talk about the way that geese organize and ally. They had alliances in their V formation and how they help each other along the way. A V formation of a migration of a flock is truly a team, a collaboration, and an alliance. And if I could just share just one short video about this, if you could run that, Bob. Thank you, Bob, and guys. So I took us from walking through geese poop across a lawn to looking at geese in a different way, and taught me some lessons around what they really mean and some of the lessons we can take out of that. So I started talking about choices, and we started talking about, what does it mean to be part of an alliance and part of a group and part of a collaboration and part of a partnership. So So now I look at it a little bit differently when I see these birds fly south in the wintertime now, and I'm hopefully that we can, if I can impart anything to you today, a couple things that we'll come back to as we close out. Maybe it'll be some of these things I'm talking about. So these are diagrams we've seen, pictures we've seen for a long time now, and it's been a trend. It started some time ago, but these are not unfamiliar charts. And the stark reality is that as we spend more money, we get less. And it's just a sad fact that we're trying to face now. For many years, this has been going on, and this trend here you can actually see from 95 out to 2006, and also from 96 to 06. We have an up in spend, we have a down in drug approvals. Another stark reminder of where we are since 1950. Now, there are inflection points here and here. But the main theme here is that we are spending more and we're getting less as far as a NME and a compound can come out within the industry. And it's daunting. It's a challenge, and it's been a challenge for a long time. So we have choices to make. Do we stand independently as organizations? And Big Pharma has long since stood on its own and tried to drive innovation and drugs to data to drugs rather, and to diagnostics. Or do we branch out and do we collaborate? Do we associate? Do we form alliances to build and foster collaborations that can drive us further? I think the choice is kind of clear, but what I was trying to say there is that we need to make that choice and make them all the time now. It's just not a one-time thing that we can get past. It's not all doom and gloom, but to start out, there are fewer new products, and that's a reality right now. The patent expirations are also a reality, and the rising development costs are a true reality, and also the increasing FDA mandates and the stringency of the FDA, and it's also a reality, stark reality. So, but the key there is there are lots of things we can do around data. There's a lot of data, a lot of huge amount of data, big data. The term's been around for a long time, but there's a lot of things we can do, but there's not a lot of information coming out of the data. So we need more analytics. We need the power of analytics. We'll hear a lot about analytics. We'll hear about personal medicine. We'll hear about personal health. We'll hear about, an array of speakers talking about these challenges and the way we face those. And also high-performance computing is a big part of that. So the choice is, do we innovate or do we stagnate? And the latter is not anything we want to do, anything near we want to get to as far as the industry goes. So we want to innovate as best as we can. So innovation is interesting. I'm an innovation guy. I'm an IT guy, so I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about the word innovation. We hear it all the time. And it's everywhere. It's prevalent in print, in radio, and on television. And according to Webster, it actually means this: introduction of something new, new idea, method, device, something novel. And that's according to Webster, but is that really what it means? Well, you could think about it that way. So turn on the TV, turn on the radio, you're going to see an ad of some sort that actually has within its pitch innovation. Car companies use this more than any other industry I've ever seen. Car companies use the word innovation all the time. Ford uses it as a moniker. Nissan uses it as a moniker. It's just not devastating, but it's staggering the amount that you see that this word is being used. And is it being used in the right way? I mean, one could argue yes, no, but it's just something that we've been facing. But people have been using the word innovation and using this as like a bandwagon to say we're better, we're faster, we're more, buy us, use us. A long time ago, they were actually using the word innovation around something like this. So innovation is not invention, innovation is renewal. And back a long time ago, the television was invented, but somebody came up with the idea of innovation around the television. They created television glasses. And on the right side, we see the ubiquitous radio hat that they thought was going to be another innovation around a radio, which had been invented, but again, innovation is around not invention, but around renewal. So is it really right? Well, it's almost right according to Webster, but really innovation is really something different. Innovation is really from the Latin word innovatus, and really that is really about renewing and making something new and being something taking something that exists before and making it much more better. So car companies inventing new things, not necessarily, but they're trying to say that they're innovating so that they can get a leg up on the competition. So we've heard this line throughout our childhood: if at first you don't succeed, try again. And then Samuel Beckett came back with another phrase that a lot of companies adhere to around ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better, fail again, fail better. What does it really mean? What lesson can we take as that as an industry? Well, it means a lot. So as we develop drugs and we develop drug compounds, we try to get these out to market, we fail. We fail sometimes in a big way. Companies a long time ago, pharma companies would put a lot of money, a lot of effort into a single experiment, run it for a long time, and then fail. And that failure had big implications for people, lost revenue, people were getting laid off, people lost their jobs, obviously, but credibility of the companies were lost when they would fail. Now, the idea here is not failure is a bad thing. If you're an innovation person, failure is actually a good thing. You want to fail fast, you want to learn, you want to move on. And that's a key. And that's where we're trying to get better at what we do and forming alliances and getting into the space of an ecosystem where we're getting to a problem very quickly, and if we have to fail, we fail quickly, and then we learn and we move on. But we don't shy away from that killer experiment. We do try to go after the killer experiment. When I was a boy, other kids had heroes. They had posters in their room. They would have big league ball players, or they have a hockey player, or they would have, I don't know, any number of things on their walls. Michael Jordan poster, and I'm not trying to date myself, but I had this on my wall, which really kind of freaked my father out. Like, is he trying to be, the old, what do you want to be when you grow up, Bobby? Well, I want to be an astronaut. Well, that's never going to happen unless I was, really going to take, flight training. But what this picture tells me, and always spoke to me since I was probably in middle school, was around 1,000 words that I get out of this. And I look at it different every time, and I get something back every time. That it's about renewal, it's about innovation, it's about challenge, it's about spirit, it's about a lot of things. And you could look at that and say, well, the Wright Brothers actually, they did invent it. Well, they renewed it. They innovated around it. They really didn't invent flight. They observed birds, they observed geese, maybe, in flying in V formation. But what they learned from that was the idea of lift, and they also knew the idea of drag. So not many people who, if they researched Wright Brothers, they started out in the newspaper business, and they weren't very good at it. They failed at that miserably. Then they went into the flying idea, and at that time there were many competitors in the field trying to attain flight. And we've all seen crazy old videos where you see a machine flapping wings and it didn't work and the person would crash off a cliff. But these guys got it right. They started out with gliders first. They started out using gliders to get the idea of lift and get the principles down. And then they went after the power to create the lift. So not many people realize this, but the Wright brothers, in a sense, failed 69 times. They didn't really fail. What they did was they innovated 69 times. They learned 69 times, iteratively, over and over and over again until they got it right. Each time was a quick failure. It was probably devastating to them at the time because they were losing the plane each time. But they were learning each time. So 69 tries, 69 experiments, 69 learnings, 69 innovations, 69 renewals on the idea, and they finally were able to do it. So if you fast forward, back in the, I believe it was 1908, they were requested to become part of the World's Fair in New York City, and they were actually paid to fly around the Statue of Liberty. And the one brother said to the other, yeah, that's great, we're making a lot of money for this one appearance, but what if we crash? What if something happens? What are we going to do? We don't really have a parachute. And one brother said to the other, I got it, let's just put a canoe on the bottom of the plane. If it crashes, then we'll survive. And they thought, okay, that's a good idea, we'll do it. And they innovated around it, and they did it. They didn't crash, by the way. They actually did make the flight. And they went around a few more times. I think they got a little bit more money for flying. I think they might have went around the statue 18 times. But it was very innovative at the time. So, innovation. What does it really mean? What does it mean to us as a company? So the worldwide chairman, Paul Stoffels, back in 2009 came out with this statement. And it's an important statement. So it was in the Boston Globe about how we look at innovation and how we're going to move forward as a company. And what does it really mean? And how are we going to get there? And it's not going to be the way we always thought about it. It's not going to be the normal classical way that we move forward. This conference is around data, the drugs and diagnostics. So we have a lot of data. Each company has tons of data locked up in silos. I mean, we see this in the actual handouts around silos. And each of our firms contain part of the answer, but do we necessarily share it? In some ways, yes. There are pre-competitive collaborations going on. I'll get to some of those ideas of how we do that. But for the most part, everyone's kind of holding on to this data. They don't want to kind of let it loose. They want to make sure that all that competitive advantage stays and all the IP stays within the company. So how do we pre-competitively ally and work together, collaborate to liberate this data and actually make use of it together? The models of the drug discovery process are changing. So at one point in time, the large pharma companies would sit as the center of the universe with all of the satellite partners and providers basically at an arm's distance, but we were working with them. This right now is a different picture today. So pharma now is not the center of the universe. Pharma is actually collaborating and integrating and being partners and aligning with these other service providers and in many cases with each other to create an ecosystem that drives innovation for the companies, spreads the cost, spreads the risk. Rising tide floats all boats, in a sense. So this is the new norm. This is what we see nowadays. So what does external innovation do at the company? People, when I talk about innovation, they say, wow, external innovation, that sounds really cool. What do you do? What happens there? How did you get that job? Sometimes I get. But it's a path, it's a journey that I've been on, and now I've landed in this area, and I've really come to embrace it. And I was running an innovation shop at Merck some years ago with some really cool people there. But this incarnation of innovation, external innovation, takes us beyond the idea of the pill. You hear this all the time, beyond the pill. But external innovation at the company right now, our group, we're really sort of looking at three tenets of what we're trying to do. It's around externalizing, it's around being open, and it's around collaborating. It's all these things, and not one thing can stand alone. They all have to work together. And the main key theme here, if you could take anything from this slide, and I apologize for some of the eye charts, but the one key thing that you might want to take away is really around pre-competitive collaboration, consortia, and open source. And I'll get to how we're trying to tackle that as a company. The engagement model is simple, but it's powerful in the way we address it. So we are actually scaling new novel IT technologies. We are fostering public-private partnerships and pre-competitive consortia and so on, and we incubate. Obviously, a lot of companies take and incubate, they bring in or they push out to their innovation centers, and then we manage that IT. And then whatever we make, whatever we can find, we will cultivate that, nurture that, grow that, shepherd it through a life cycle process and either keep it, or for the most part, if it's open, move it out into the outside world, and that's one of the key goals. So some of the key ways we address this, and really to the point of the conference, is around focusing on the innovation technology, focusing on supporting scientific collaborations, externalizing the internal technology, and then running the programs in a collaborative external focus. So we're actually externally collaborating and putting that into motion. We're not just kind of sitting back and watching it happen. The group is, like I said, it's a group that's very interesting. We have an ever-evolving portfolio of things that we're chasing down, and I won't read off all of these, but obviously big data in the left top corner is probably one of the biggest one. Big data, advanced analytics, and visual informatics is probably I would say the most important thing we're chasing right now because, like I said before, we have a ton of data. In some ways it's locked, it's not liberated. We're trying to liberate that, and we're trying to find better ways to analyze that data and make sense of it and make it an asset that we can move from just being a data store out to something that becomes a drug and actually maybe something that becomes a diagnostic. Other ways that we do this actually are around supporting scientific collaborations, and I'll give you a few exemplars here. So Janssen in the United States, Janssen in Europe, in the European communities is a company that we've actually formed some time ago. So people say Janssen, Johnson. It's all basically Janssen, but it's interesting the way this came about. But at this point in time, the Janssen R&D IT, we formed a collaboration with a company, an Atlanta-based company called Liaison Healthcare Informatics. And what we did was we architected a collaborative environment. And this is an interesting story. This happened on the floor of BioIT about a year ago. We were walking among all the booths. We were looking at the different vendors, and we thought, wow, is there anyone here, any one company that could actually help us possibly build a collaborative ecosystem in the cloud? And we went to a few companies, and we went through a bidding process, and finally we landed with what we thought was a really, really good partner, and they had been an outstanding partner, Liaison. And what we've come to build now is a collegial ecosystem that's part of a industry consortia and also an academic consortia that drives analysis in the cloud. And I think this is really going to be an ever-growing platform that we have put in place today. Also, within the group, we drove a CRADA project. For people that are familiar with the idea of CRADA, Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. So this came from the irritable bowel syndrome challenge around the immunology group. And right now, which is interesting, we are partnering with the Mayo Clinic, the Navy, and Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, just to name a few. And without reading the verbatim of the article, suffice it to say that we're leveraging this relationship. What they found was that soldiers that go overseas now into certain theaters, they come back with microorganisms in their bodies, and they're actually having IBD and pre-IBD, and we're trying to get to the point where we're actually trying to discover some of these mechanisms are actually affecting them. The key thing here around the data side is that the Navy has millions and millions of records and electronic health records on their soldiers, and also the Army and the Mayo Clinic is working together on this. So it's very important. It's kind of big news. There'll be another article coming out this week in the P&R Newswire about how we're actually moving this forward. The Center for Visual and Decision Informatics is an interesting relationship. It started out small. The center is an affiliation between Drexel University in Philadelphia and the University of Lafayette in Louisiana with a huge member body. And interestingly enough, J&J sits as the only pharma company as part of this consortia. The model is that you are engaged with the researchers within each of the universities, and you are able to tap into their talent to seek out and find an array of experiments. And for us, we vote on what we want to kind of put our chips into. They give you 30 points and you put your chips into this basket, and you actually pick projects from the researcher side, and then you collaborate with them. You build upon the relationship. And right now we're chasing basically big data platform research for decision informatics, and we're chasing leveraging social media for healthcare management and pharmacovigilance. So far it's been very successful. We've been a member now for about 3 years. And this is just an example of the member body here. So you can see there are local ties. You have CHOP, you've got Lockheed Martin, you've got Thomson Reuters, you've got us. And then you also have an array of companies that are based out of Louisiana. And some interesting things that they're doing here is these departments are looking at how to detect signals in data, big data, that comes in that can tell them if there's going to be another Katrina, disaster contingency plans, and also they're using it to create new analytics around their levee system and how they can actually look at the rivers with new technology and new sensors, almost the idea of the Internet of Everything. They're putting sensors all along these river lines to make sure they're getting good data back. If there's any way, shape, or form they can prevent a disaster or get people out quicker, they're trying to look at these analytics in a more closer fashion. So externalizing our internal technology. So we talked a little bit about how we want to kind of take something from the inside, move it out as an open source if possible. So we've done this for people that are in the room. Some people who are current colleagues and former colleagues, they are aware of what Transmart is. And Transmart is a success story that was actually started within J&J and actually given to the free world in a sense. The model of Transmart is pretty basic but powerful. Again, it was actually just something that was started out within the walls of J&J, but kind of took hold and got viral and became very important to the people who do their work on this platform. The consortia that we were pushing this out to had started out very small, but then it became very big. I won't go over this in the sake of time, but this is basically a schematic of how Transmart is built. Basically, you're taking clinical trial information, non-clinical gene expression, curated content, text corpuses, putting them into a data warehouse, and putting layers of master data and federated data on top, and then creating really some strong mining capabilities around this to get really good data back out of this. The consortia started small. It spread out to the IMI, which is the Innovative Medicines Initiative out of Europe, and also the IMEC. And in only 2 years, you can see the growth of the system. It's gone from just a few partners out to all these partners and branched out again, and it's ever growing. I think right now I put approximately 2 years because I think this might be in its 3rd year, so it's almost like a toddler in a way. And then finally, external innovation, we look at collaboration. We try to put this into motion. We just don't try to talk the talk. We try to walk the walk as a group. And one of the key things is we partnered with the companies Merck, Lilly, and Pfizer to create the investigative databank. And this was actually in a news release as well in the PRA Newswire, sorry. And the key thing here is around releasing information into one single database that reduces the cost of each company trying to chase down clinical GXP records for the investigators. And it sounds very simple. It sounds like, yeah, it's just investigator records, but it's very important. Companies spend a lot of money on these investigators and trying to actually use the same investigators across multiple projects. And at one time, an investigator might be working with one company, another company might want to use them. Well, they want their resume, they want their CV, they want to learn about who they are so that they can tap into the same talent pool. So this is something that's very key for us right now. Has anyone here heard of the PSI Alliance? Raise your hand. A few? Okay, so maybe 10%. So the PSI Alliance is interesting. The PSI, again, you see this word alliance. PSI Alliance is really around coming together as an industry and a bunch of partners together to really lower the barriers around innovation. It's successful. it's growing, and there's actually another conference coming up in New York in about 2 weeks. If I was to come back and report on that, I would if I could. But it's an interesting alliance. It's interesting for this fact right here. It's huge. It's just nonstop. These companies are coming in at I'm not sure what the rate would be. I'd have to check with the folks who run the actual alliance. But it just seems to be an ever-growing, popular thing to become part of a consortia alliance that drives each other's business, pre-competitively and openly, which are keys. Here's just an exemplar of how they've succeeded as a group. The PSI Alliance members, they were actually sending biomarker data back and forth using Microsoft Exchange. And no insult to Microsoft, but it's not the best vehicle to really be spreading and sharing huge amounts of data. And the standardization was lacking. So the group got together as an industry partners. They got together and they thought about, how do we tackle this problem? Well, they actually looked at it and said, okay, let's create a set of standards. And they actually came up with this. They have unmet needs. They created a value proposition, just like any other project would be in any other IT function, and they had a business case. And what they did was they were able to put into place an exchange standard around this data that never existed before. So think about it. They went from spreadsheets, real lethargic spreadsheet movement, to automation. And then automation can take that data and hopefully move it into an area where people can actually use that and facilitate the drug-making process, which takes us from the basic pool of data to what we're thinking around the D2D today. This is just a quick picture of how the PSI Alliance works. You have a member body. You're swimming in the same pool together. You have common needs. You have a social aspect to it. There's like a social media aspect to it. And there's constant flow of information from the PSI Alliance back and forth. So there's a constant awareness of what each is doing. There's a constant opportunity for those folks to get together and kind of tackle challenges. Accelerate Biopharma, this was another consortia that was in the news about a year and a half ago. J&J became part of this with a few other companies. And I'm sorry, I jumped. The most telling thing around the Accelerate Biopharma was really the acceleration of the development of new medicines. And this is what we're talking about. How do you take standardization, data, move it from point A to point B very quickly and get it through the stages it has to get through? Now, there are 5 key things that Accelerate Biopharma is chasing. Standardization is the first one because they know that a nomenclature and a common language needs to be created so that the companies can speak to each other. So far, I believe there are 7 to 10 companies that are part of this now. Again, it's a growing situation. At the company, we're also leveraging crowdsourced biology. I'm not sure if people are aware of, I'm sure they're aware of what crowdsourcing is, but crowdsourcing around biology is very interesting, and what we're trying to do around this is very interesting. And if you think about it, we're taking all these resources and putting them into the puzzle around a database, a knowledge base, and what are we going to get out of that? Well, this just started, and maybe I can report back at some other time, but it's very interesting what we're trying to do around crowdsourced biology. And I think it's going to be something that other companies might want to emulate in the future, not that they might not be doing it now. So how are we on time? Good? Okay, good. All right, so I had a lot of slides, and I apologize, but this is really a keynote, not just a brain dump. But I wanted to kind of show a little bit about what we're trying to do around big data and scientific cloud computing. So the R&D strategic goals, if you looked at this and you spread them across companies, are probably common. A lot of companies probably have these same challenges around process time. But I think the main thing to take away here is really around getting faster at what we do and moving the data into a position where people can quickly analyze it. And that is leveraging the horsepower of cloud computing and high-performance computing. So the case was made for about maybe a year ago that around HPC, big data, and elastic cloud computing, what we would do. So reducing cycle times and increasing efficiencies was a mantra I learned a long time ago when I first got started in pharma. They looked at me and they said, Bob, if you can create something for us out of IT that can just cut one step out of the process, can you help us? And that's what we were trying to do for a number of years. Reduce cycle times, increase efficiencies to move the pipeline faster and faster, move that process further. There were times where I would actually sit with a scientist and have a stopwatch and sit there and watch them for a whole day and watch them go from station to station and map everything that they were doing, and then taking that back and trying to articulate that into some kind of technological advancing opportunity for them to kind of increase the speed of what they were doing. That was starting for me maybe 10, 12 years ago. Now there's many more tools to kind of take you there. Before, we didn't really have these kind of tools. So the philosophy really around submit once technology is something that we're chasing and that we're getting good at. And this is just not for our company. This goes for probably all the companies here, what we're trying to do. So we're trying to leverage public cloud, and we're trying to access public data, and we're trying to leave the footprint outside the door, outside the walls of the company. Use that public data, use the public cloud to its greatest good and to our greatest advantage. Lots been said about whole genome sequencing and the challenge around that, and we are not unlike any other company. We had the same challenge, and this is how we tried to tackle it, by using high-performance compute, using big data, using cloud storage, and we actually landed on a complete workflow that basically, without reading the entire eye chart, I think the key takeaway here is the compute workflow that can currently process all samples in just 2 days rather than years or months or days. If you go back to the prior slide, it's really around this: weeks to hours, years to weeks, years to days, or days to days. So you can do any kind of metric you want there, but that's the main key there. So we were successful at that, and we continue to use this and evolve this into other projects. Other teams have come to us to kind of rely on this kind of methodology, so we're really taking advantage of it. And here's just a quick visual of how this has really helped the company. At one time, if you went along the vertical of the black line, you could see how long things were taking, but when you break it out into cloud and high-performance compute and using the firepower of these capabilities around big data, you actually get faster and faster. It's no secret, but a lot of companies really, if they're not doing it, they might want to consider if they can actually afford to do that. If they can't afford to do that themselves and stand independently, they might want to think about aligning, creating a partnership, creating a collaborative to kind of get them where they have to go. This schematic, and this is kind of telling, starting a trial in the cloud and what it can take from the cycle time, how it can reduce the cycle time. The experiment that we ran was very interesting, and it was very effective. Starting the run in the cloud and then ending the run in the cloud, it reduced a lot of cycle time, and a lot of efficiencies were gained out of this one approach. So, what do we do now that we see opportunities to collaborate? We see opportunities to engage and form alliances and be together on certain things and work with other companies, not just Pfizer, not just Lilly, not just Merck, to name a few, GSK, but also academically, what can we do? So how do we do this? So what's really stopping us? The question becomes, what's pre-competitive and what's not? What are we willing to give up to get something back? And it's a hard decision. It's not one that's easily made for anyone in the companies that we work in. Whether you're a large company or a small company, you want to keep your IP inside. That's the natural behavior of a company. You don't want to let that out, and why would you? But there has to be ways to step out of that thinking. There's got to be a way to move beyond keeping everything locked up inside of your company, and how do you do that, and what's the best approach to do this? So you can do it organizationally, you can do it culturally, you can teach people, you can train people, but at the end of the day, it's the comfort factor of moving the data outside into an area where people can collaborate on it, and I think that's really going to be the key. And not just for pharma, not just for pharma indeed, it's going to be for other industries, and why not partner with other industries that actually are working in big data spaces? So, for instance, why don't we partner with Lockheed Martin on a project? Why don't we partner with Dow Chemical and see how they do their thing? And we can teach them and we can share the knowledge. And what astounds me is that the Springhouse campus sits right next to Dow Chemical's IT technology division over in Springhouse, PA. And I said to my people, I'm like, has anyone ever gone over there and had a conversation with Dow? And they're like, no. I'm like, why not? It's like trying to change that mindset. Why? Just go over, get in touch with somebody from IT and Dow just to have a conversation to see what they're doing. How are they doing it? How are they tackling it? We don't necessarily need Dow's chemicals, but we do probably need what they're doing, and they might need what we're doing as far as the methodology goes, as far as sort of imparting the methodology and sharing of knowledge. So we stand on this fine line. And we continue to stand on the fine line, and we will continue to stand on the fine line, and we will continue to have to make this decision. In certain ways, do we stand alone or do we collaborate? I'm an advocate for collaboration. I'm an advocate for open innovation, and then I'm an advocate for sharing knowledge. I'm not an advocate for giving up my job to another company, and I'm not an advocate for giving away the bank of information that we have, but I am an advocate for collaboration, building partnerships, and building alliances that strongly forge the way forward for the companies to work together and move the ball. A rising tide floats all boats, as they say. To that end, J&J is not dumb. They knew that this was coming. They saw this coming. Other companies were jumping on the idea of innovation centers, and J&J quickly took action, and they created 4 innovation centers across the globe. The most important thing about this is where they're situated: Boston, London, San Francisco, and Shanghai. You think about that, and you think about the locations of where they are, yeah, other companies are there too, but really it's around being at the heart of the research that goes on and being closely connected to the research that's going on within the community and bring that research in. And I think the key there is really the geographic presence of these centers, and I don't think these will be the last centers that we build. I think there will be more and more. I think there's never an opportunity more clear than being in a vicinity of the research universities and academics to pull that knowledge in. So how do we make that happen? How do we do it as a company? Well, we want to do it together. We just don't want to stand alone and try to do it by ourselves. We want to really be out there and seeking the input of other companies, being collaborative, opening the arms of the company and saying, we want to partner with you. We have something to give you, and we realize that you have something to give back. And I think if you think about it in that way, if you think about what we're trying to do, in the very beginning when I talked about choices and the choices that we make, I would choose to partner. I would choose to be part of an organization that wants to partner, and I would choose to openly innovate. Again, I don't choose to give away our secrets, but I want to choose to openly innovate and sort of move us forward as best we can. This is one of my favorite slides. This tells you what you can do when you openly innovate and what you can do when you share and you can pre-competitively collaborate. So here you have not just companies, you have countries that came together to solve a problem. And each company benefited from building a space station, and each country benefited from building a space station, and each country continues to reap the rewards of the space station. And if you think about it, they put down their ideals. They drop their shields and they work together to do this. And I really think this is a cool pick, and again, a picture tells 1,000 words of what can be done when you want to partner and ally with another company or a provider. So in closing, the takeaways I think for us really today, if I could give you anything back from the time we spent together, are these things. What are we thinking about when we walk out of this room and say, hey, Bob talked, it was great, show me some pictures of the Wright Brothers flying around the Statue of Liberty, but really what did we get out of it? Well, I would hope these 5 things. If you could take anything away, think about this. Does it change things for you? Hopefully. Does it change things for your company, or can you take it back and become a change agent in some way, shape, or form? Hopefully. But I think if I got anything out of this, and I gave you anything, I would think just take away these key things around building upon these kind of sort of takeaways, if you could, making the right choices, building strong alliances, spreading our risk, which is actually part of collaboration, pre-competitive spirit, and I think the main thing is collaboration networks. They're very, very important. I think we know that as an industry now that we're not going to get very far if we don't collaborate. We can't stand alone anymore. We have to be part of a collaboration spirit and mindset nowadays. And I think if we do that, we're much more better off than we were a number of years ago when we stood independently and thought we could just take on the world and do it all by ourselves. That's not the case anymore. We have to really think differently nowadays. So thank you very much. Any sure there's time for questions. Yeah.
Yeah, so on one of your slides, you said that you're focusing on HPC, big data, analysis, and obviously biology. So when you're collaborating and bringing people together, you have to do more than just put people in the same room. They have to speak the same language and have to know about what everyone else is doing to the extent that they can actually have an intelligent conversation.
Yeah.
So given that these are somewhat orthogonal disciplines, how do you think you can get people to know enough to collaborate?
Well, you can't teach it on the fly, right? You can't do that for sure. So you don't want to throw a bunch of people in a room and try to tackle a problem when they don't have the nomenclature or the knowledge. So I think it starts out with first the knowledge assessment, dealing with the universities, dealing with the companies you're talking about, dealing with these vendors to make sure that they have the, to be honest, the knowledge to do what you need to do. I think it would start there. I think the main key thing there is before you even get to the knowledge, talent, recognition part, you need to look at the willingness for the companies to do this, because I've seen cases where you get a consortia together and then you have 5 companies or 5 members and 3 bow out right away. Then you're left with 2, then you have to go scramble. So you need that commitment level first, and then the willingness first, and then I think then you start there, then you drive into the knowledge question. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Sure.
When you're talking about having lots of outside collaborations, bringing data into one larger space so that you can do data mining,
Yeah.
because of their backgrounds, like he said, they have different data models. And how do you standardize that so that you can actually do data mining and not recreate your analysis for every model that comes in?
No, that's absolutely great point. Investigative Databank is a good example of that. Pfizer, Lilly, Merck, and us all had different formats for this data. And it actually came down to a conversation in a 6-hour meeting in New York City at Pfizer. And I stood up and we talked about how to standardize the data. And it's not easy, but there has to be an agreement at some point in time, right? So you have to kind of figure out what you're going to do. Now, it could be simple as, I don't want to water down your question, but it could be, how are you going to exchange this data with me? CSV, pipe delimited, XML format. Some of that was actually in that conversation. You would think that these companies actually have sophisticated ways of sharing data, much more than an FTP into a Dropbox as a CSV. You have to start out really kind of dropping your guard and saying, we might not be as sophisticated as you. We might not be as advanced as you. Your systems that you work with are a little bit better than ours, but how can we share these systems together? But I think the heart of your question is really around getting to the point where you're able to agree to the format first, then you can talk about the tooling. And I probably really simplified the answer there for you, but I think that starts there. Yeah.
My question. I see. I'm on the way. Would you talk about that issue of what is pre-competitive? I think that's really...
Well, you had to guess that one, didn't you? Okay. What's pre-competitive? Well, pre-competitive, openly innovating is, for Joanne, answer is what's not in the vault that they don't want to give up. So, for a long time in my mind, placebo data was something that when I first got into J&J, I said, what are we doing around placebo data? Are we sharing it? And it caught some people off guard. And I'm like, why aren't we sharing it? But there's things that we learned around placebo data. That is a pre-competitive sharing of a type of data that you could share. The data is collected. It sits and sits and sits, and really maybe people kind of go back and do retrospective analysis. But for the most part, it sits inside that silo, inside the wall of the company. Is it really so bad if the placebo findings is actually shared with another company? That was my question. And that's a question I've been asking for a while now. So I think the classification of the data that you're talking about, that classification, the privacy issue of that data to the company, not to the patient, is the key, is around what's pre-competitive. Long conversations, and many times you'll get through a pre-competitive discussion and it breaks down. It just doesn't go forward. The people are just uncomfortable around the idea of sharing what they have. But for those companies, and I'll go back to this gentleman's question around how do you get people on board, it's really the willingness. It comes down to the willingness to actually share it. Then you get into the deeper, I would call it like levels of conversation, the willingness, the talent, the knowledge, and then you get into the data question. And then you talk about what am I willing to give up to get something back? If I give you this piece of data, what piece of data do you have that I can share? What tools do you have in your bag of tricks that I have in my bag of tricks that we can share together on some of this data? So there's a give and take. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Bob. Thank you for the very inspirational innovation presentation. In socializing with the pharma community about building platforms that are for public-private partnerships or for collaborative efforts, we are facing the high-level discussions, of VPs, CMOs, et cetera, who have this fear of what if, how do I let go of data? So a lot of tips that you provided in this Q&A session was about more on the detail level. But once we get up to the higher levels of discussion to bring them into consider the collaboratives, what were the best practices to get the higher level management involved? to convince them that internally and externally they can.
Yeah, I'm going to steal this, by the way. So, okay. The first question to the senior people, okay, if you're going to be a change agent for this kind of approach, there's a list out there, I'm not sure if people have ever seen it, it's called the 10 innovation killers. We did it before, it didn't work, cost too much, we tried that before. Joe over in the other department tried it and it failed, and there's just these squashing statements that come back from senior leadership. I would go back and retort back saying, yeah, that did happen, but let's try it. Why not? What do you have to lose? Just take one small experiment and run it, do a proof of concept to see what you have to lose, and then see what you can gain. And the key thing there, to answer your question, is before you jump in, you need a case, right? You need to come back and say, here's my case, here's my business case, and then lay out what are the qualitative and what are the quantitative benefits that you're seeking, and almost create a hypothesis around that test. What's my outcome? So what am I looking to get? What's the potential for it? And if you can, get to it what they call ROI or IRR on the project. Then that kind of gets their ears moving a little bit, like twitching, like, oh, IRR, oh, ROI, oh, I can save some money here? Okay, cool. So I think that's one of the key things. That's the way I approach it right now as far as I work with my group.
We have time for one more, and just for convenience, I'm going to go to the front row.
Thank you. My question is around data security. Putting all of this data up on the cloud, is this supposed to be a model where the pharmaceutical companies have certain security areas but don't want other members of the public or other companies to access this? Is this totally open information? How do we prevent the information from being abused, misunderstood by the press, this type of thing?
Okay, that's 4 questions in one. So I'll give you an example of JACE, the Janssen Collaborative Environment. So we built this system with Liaison Healthcare Informatics, who's here today. The idea is it's a cloud within a cloud. It's a co-tenancy within the tenant situation. And how do you secure that? Well, you're using some really sophisticated tools to kind of do this. You're using SAML, for secure logon. You're using encryption. You're using authentication mechanisms. But I think your question is, that's great, Bob, but you have pockets of data within this pool of data. How are you securing? How is one guy's view or girl's view different from the other view, and how you stop them from it? How you segregate that data? Okay, well, if you take it into the SharePoint world, you have roles. You've got super users, you got admins, and you kind of address it in that certain way. But I'm not sure if what you're saying is there the question of the danger of another user getting into another area of the data. Well, they wouldn't be part of the collaborative if they weren't part of the sharing of that data. That's one thing. You don't want to put 5 partners in that have 5 distinct uses for the data, or not uses, but you have 5 distinct users that all could step on each other's toes if they got into each other's data. That's not what you want. You want to have a situation where it's a use case that is a collaborative. The data that is in place is used by all. I think you want to start there.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.